To the Point with Kelly Dunn and Michael Williams.
16 states are allowing marijuana to be used for medical reasons. Should Florida join the list? Is this something that should go on the ballot for voters to approve next year? That's what one local legislator is calling for. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Point. Michael Williams is off today. That legislator I was just talking about is State Representative Jeff Clemons. He's a Democrat from Lake Worth, and he's joining us to talk about this and some other issues in addition to politics. Thank you very much, Representative Clemons, for being with us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You are trying to get your fellow legislators to approve a measure allowing Floridians to vote on whether to legalize marijuana next November. Let's get to the point. Why are you looking to do this now?
Well, as you mentioned, that 1/3 of the states in the U.S. have now legalized medical marijuana, and it's been proven to be effective in treating certain kinds of illnesses and pain. And we have a lot of folks that are suffering in the state of Florida. We continue to feed them heavy pharmaceutical, narcotic drugs that can kill you. So I'm looking for a safer alternative. What
do you say, though, to those who argue that medical marijuana has not been approved by the FDA and is harmful to people, harms their lungs?
Well, I think that the overwhelming scientific evidence shows that it is not harmful in the ways that something like an OxyContin would be harmful. When we went through this whole pill mill debate here in Florida, we talked about 7 people a day dying from using these pharmaceutical, heavy narcotic drugs. To our knowledge, medical marijuana has never killed anybody, but it has helped a lot of people to deal with their pain. And we have a large senior population here in Florida that often is suffering from different kinds of illnesses and pain. And why shouldn't we give them the tools that they deserve in order to be able to deal with that?
If something like this were approved in Florida, though, would it not lead eventually to the legalization of marijuana in general?
You know, that's a debate that we can have. I'm more concerned right now about the people who are suffering and who need this kind of help. And frankly, it's cheaper, it's a safer alternative, and I think that's why you've seen the mood of the country change. Statistics show that now half the people in the United States think we should just legalize marijuana altogether, much less medical marijuana. So I think this is an issue that's coming down the pipe, and here in Florida, I think we need to get with the curve.
How would Florida benefit by legalizing marijuana?
Well, a couple ways. First of all, obviously, those people who are suffering would be helped. But there's also tax dollars and revenue to be generated, and a lot of business opportunities. California is not perhaps the most significant example of how to be able to govern medical marijuana, but there are states that have done it the right way. New Mexico, New Jersey, and they're realizing significant revenues. It's creating jobs. The agriculture folks are starting to get into the game. And so I think that there are many different ways that it can benefit. And in terms of downsides, we spend a lot of time and a lot of money in this state imprisoning people for possessions of small amounts, people who are in pain, people who are having troubles. And I think that we can better spend that money on education or other things.
What do you think your chances are of getting this passed by the legislature to get it on the ballot or for voters to approve it?
Well, that's the important thing, is that we're not asking the legislators to vote for medical marijuana. We're just saying let's let the people speak. So, it's always a tough road in Tallahassee for a Democrat to get things done, but we're trying to change hearts and minds, one person at a time. It may not happen in a year, it may not happen in 2 years, but we're going to keep pushing, and I think eventually we're going to see the legislature come around on this.
You have another bill requiring gas stations that have different prices for cash and credit cards to post those different prices. Right. I know I've been suckered in by that before. You think you're pulling up to a station with a decent price, and then you find out, oh, well, forget it. I'm paying with credit or whatever. How big of a problem is this, do you think?
I like to file consumer-friendly bills. Earlier this year, I filed a bill banning banks from charging people for debit cards. Now they're no longer doing that, so I've withdrawn that bill. But this bill is another pro-consumer bill. It basically says you just have to be honest with people. We're not asking them to charge the same price, although that may be an even better idea. But in this legislature, I think we'll have much more luck in passing a bill that just says they just have to post both prices. No one likes pulling up to the pump thinking that the price is $3.39 a gallon and paying $3.50 a gallon.
And how likely do you think this is for success?
This one we have a Republican sponsor in the Senate, and it's only been referred to 2 committees, which usually bodes well for a bill. The Speaker, when the Speaker doesn't like a bill, he might refer it to 4 or 5 committees. This one only has 2, so I have some good hopes for this bill.
You say you're a fan of these consumer-driven type bills.
Right.
What's behind that? I mean, obviously you want to help your constituents. I get that part, but why specifically this targeted area for you?
Tallahassee and to a larger extent Washington, D.C. are dominated by money interests, and I think it's nice every once in a while to remember why we got into this game, and that's just to help people. And so these bills, tend to obviously go over well with constituents, but I think they have real ramifications because it's not just helping the average consumer, but remember, all your small businesses in the area usually send their workers to these gas stations with debit cards as well. So we're helping a lot of small businesses with this bill.
You talked about getting into the game, and you are a former mayor of Lake Worth and have joined the game of the state legislature, first term state rep. What's been the biggest surprise holding now a state office?
I think it's this, we all have this idea that 120 of us state representatives go to Tallahassee and we all talk about our best ideas, and the best ideas win out, and then we pass those bills. But I found that it's a very top-down type of process where it's really the Speaker of the House and maybe 5 or 6 of his most trusted allies who decide what bills get heard, what committees they move through, and what legislation actually ends up passing. And that to me was a big surprise. I really thought that more people would have input into the process.
And being a first-term Democrat, did you feel like you were left out in the cold?
I found ways to work across the aisle. Lake Worth is a kind of a microcosm. When I was the mayor there, I had an anarchist sitting on my right and a conservative Republican sitting on my left, and you find ways to work with people. It's tougher on the big issues. Obviously, I'm not going to agree with them about cutting important government programs and programs that help people. I'm not going to agree with them about cutting salaries to teachers or cutting funding to students. I'm just not going to be there with them. But there are a lot of issues that we can find where we can work together, like this gas bill that I have that, like I said, I have a Republican sponsor in the Senate.
Is it frustrating, though? I mean, to feel like, because I'm sure you go up there, everybody probably does, ready to change the world. Yeah,
there's a high level of frustration, but I think I knew what I was getting into, things don't stay the same forever.
That's true. Well, they certainly don't when it's an election year. How big of an impact do you think that the Occupy movement and the Tea Party is going to be having on the elections here in the state of Florida?
Well, we've certainly seen the impact of the Tea Party. We've seen the Republican Party move further and further to the right, so much so that even in a presidential election, someone who's a moderate with a lot of good ideas like John Huntsman can't even get any TV time. And that's happened here in Florida as well. We've seen some very conservative legislation passed. Last year when we went up there, we hoped to be able to do some work on jobs and the economy. Instead, we spent most of the time talking about hurting public employees, cutting funding to students, and a lot of abortion-related bills. I don't think that's what the public wants us to do, either on the Democrat or the Republican side. I think they expect us to be in Tallahassee working on issues of larger impact to our communities. So, I think that there's opportunities to do that. On the Occupy movement, I think their frustration is born out of the corporatization of our government, and I think we're seeing some changes there, and we saw those in the elections last week when we saw a lot of the items around the country that were anti-worker and anti-consumer were victorious.
What hope do you have? Do you have hope for more Democrats to be voted into office in 2012? Certainly there's been a Republican landslide lately.
Yeah. I think there is a backlash about some of the legislation that the Republicans have passed, or in Washington, D.C., their unwillingness to be able to come to the table and really work on a package that includes both spending cuts and tax increases for the most wealthy. We look at our polls and we see that over 70% of voters want the wealthy to be taxed at a higher rate and to help bring the debt down. So I think here in Florida we're going to see that as well, as the result of Amendments 5 and 6 that require them to draw these districts during the redistricting process in a fair manner. It certainly can't get much worse for Democrats in the state of Florida. It's 81-39 in the House right now, and frankly the Republicans have controlled Florida for 14-15 years now. So if you don't like what's happened in your state, you know who to talk to.
State Representative Jeff Clemons, thank you very much for joining us today. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Up in Tallahassee. We'll talk to you again. Thanks again. Still to come today, more with our political roundtable, presidential campaign moment that has some comparing it to Bill Clinton. We have some interesting topics to discuss today, and we have our interesting roundtable guest to discuss them with us. News Channel 5 political analyst and coordinator of the American Studies program at Lynn University, Robert Watson, and Brian Crowley, author of the CrowleyPoliticalReport.com. Let's begin, though, and take a listen to some interesting political comments we heard this week. Listen right here.
He suddenly reached over and he put his hand on my leg, under my skirt. I was very, very surprised and very shocked. I said, "What are you doing? You know I have a boyfriend. This isn't what I came here for." Mr. Cain said, "You want a job, right?"
The charges and the accusations I absolutely reject. They simply didn't happen.
How is Herman Cain doing from a public relations standpoint, Brian?
You know, I think early into the crisis, or potential crisis, he didn't handle it very well. I think as the week wore on last week, he became more forceful in his denials, a little more articulate for the most case about it. It's still a difficult he said, she said situation, so unless somebody comes up with some sort of definitive proof, because so far, and you know, the polls so far show that his supporters continue to support him. He continues to raise a significant amount of money. I think a lot of people at this stage anyway are looking at it like he sounded more like a boorish 14-year-old kid, you know, than somebody who was a sexual predator, if you will. You know, barring something really brand new coming out, so far he seems to be doing okay.
Yeah, I would agree. He's handling it a little bit better, but this past week he did have another huge gaffe. He said, you know, for each woman that accuses me, there's thousands who haven't. You know, I mean, a mass murderer could make the same argument. So, you know, he still is a little, you know, amateurish in terms of his media. You know, there's another side to this. We've seen Eliot Spitzer, we've seen John Edwards, we've seen Gary Hart. We've seen politicians whose careers end over womanizing and harassment. But we've also seen, you know, Bill Clinton was popular when he left office. David Vitter in Louisiana caught with prostitutes in 2 states. He ran on family values in the Bible, and he was reelected. There's an interesting case, though, if you look at Brock Adams and Bob Packwood back 2-3 decades ago in Oregon and Washington. Both those members of Congress had multiple harassment cases. At first, they were successful. Then when a second one came out, a third one, as they increased and increased, it just became a distraction for the whole party to the point where the party stopped supporting them. The fellow members of Congress stopped supporting them. At what point is this Cain gate or this harassment game going to become such a distraction for the other 7 Republicans running for the party?
I think we need to throw up a caution flag here. There have been some accusations made. Herman Cain has rather forcefully denied that he has done anything wrong. So I think, you know, there's no proof yet that he has done something wrong. So I just think we should, you know, before we start calling it Scandal Gate or Cain Gate, I think we need to throw up the caution flag. Anybody can accuse somebody of something. I'm not saying that Cain didn't do something. I'm just saying we don't know.
But I do believe it's become
yet.
a distraction at this point for everybody, for the agenda.
And Republicans are uncomfortable with it.
Sure
There are a group of people that support
squirming during the
but you know,
debate.
this is not the kind of political dialogue that the party wants to be having right now. And you know, if you look at 2011 as a political year for the Republican Party, there's been a lot of these kinds of distractions on issues and things where there hasn't been sometimes that distract from the issues that they want to talk about, which is Obama and the administration.
Well, no one did hit him on this during the CNBC debate. None of the other candidates. So, are any of them likely to venture into?
Well, there's no need to. You know, everybody else is doing it, so there's no reason for them to say anything. They can say unless some proof comes along, and then they'll be obliged to say something. I mean, if somebody comes up with some solid proof that Herman Cain did something wrong, it would seem to me then the other candidates would have to address the issue.
Are Americans kind of used to this after Bill Clinton?
Well, there's a difference between this and Bill Clinton, and one of the big differences is that the accusations about Bill Clinton were consensual. That he was involved with other women in a consensual relationship. These accusations suggest something that was not consensual. So far, they largely suggest boorish behavior, but it's not consensual behavior, so it's not exactly like Bill Clinton.
You know, I think we're all desensitized because there's been so much of this in politics and Hollywood and so forth. But by the same token, if you go to office water coolers and coffee pots all around the country in offices, what are they talking about? They're not talking about interest rates. They're talking about this kind of thing. So it just fans the fires of this. And perception is reality.
Takes the focus off the...
Yeah, sure it does.
The big issues in the country. All right, coming up, a moment that could make the history books. We'll talk about that when we return. When James Stockdale was running for vice president, he infamously said, "Who am I? Why am I here?" That quote may have been topped by Rick Perry at last week's debate.
And I will tell you, it's 3 agencies of government when I get there that are gone: commerce, education, and the, what's the third one there? Let's see.
You need 5.
Oh, 5, okay. So
energy
sector. What happened in there?
Yeah, I stepped in it, man. Yeah, it was embarrassing. Of course it was.
Okay, I kind of, you do have to appreciate his ability to go, yeah, I know, it was bad.
Yeah. Well, he indeed stepped in it. And, the problem for Governor Perry at this point isn't the mistake he made in the debate. I mean, that happens to people. I'm sure it's happened to you on set.
Multiple times.
Multiple
times.
Well, it's happened to Michael.
He's not here, we'll say that.
We'll say that about it.
So you forget something. And but the problem for Rick Perry in this issue isn't that he had this one incident. This is one of a string of missteps and where he seems out of touch. Frankly, he doesn't seem like he spends much time doing his homework before these debates, or that he thoroughly understands these issues. And as we were talking about off camera during the break, as you pointed out, I mean, the folks in Texas got to be looking at this governor and going, what in the world? I mean, the Texas self-image can't be really strong.
Not really.
If I was in the audience, well, he's trying to shake the thing that he's George W. Bush, the sequel, so this doesn't help. And as you said, he's made many mistakes. If I was in the audience, I would have screamed out the answer. I felt so bad for him. It's like, who wants to be a millionaire with a lifeline? Who wants to be a president? I'll be your lifeline. You can call me for 20 bucks. Call the professor. But if you look at this from a historical perspective, Gerald Ford had quite a bungle in 1976 debating Jimmy Carter when he said there is no Soviet influence in Eastern Europe and never will be in a Ford administration, to the point where everybody snickered kind of like that, and it dismissed Ford, who was not a dummy, he just made a mistake. Dan Quayle, remember the Lloyd Benston comment in 1992 in the vice presidential debate, or I guess it was 88, when Benston said, "You, sir, I know John Kennedy, he's a friend of mine, you are no John Kennedy, sir." And poor Quayle looked like the little deer in the road with the headlights coming down on it. People have not recovered well from these kind of gaffes. It's almost in the debates now where the way we tune in or don't tune in, if you have to say something either brilliant or something either really foolish to have people tune in. So the key when you go to debate is just don't trip up. And Perry's been giving us weekly trip-ups, so how much longer can he hang on?
Well, I don't think we should forget that the one thing that Rick Perry has that most of the other candidates still do not have is a lot of money. And, with the right commercials and everything, he might salvage his campaign. So I'm hesitant. A lot of folks, immediately after the debate were, that's the end of the Perry campaign. In the age of instant analysis, that's a bit of a rush to judgment.
He should use that money to hire debate coaches.
Let's see what the polls say. A new poll of Florida Republicans has some bad news for Perry. Asked if the primary were held today, 27% said they would vote for Herman Cain, 21% for Mitt Romney, 17% selected Newt Gingrich, and 5% said Perry. All the other candidates had less than 5%. This poll was taken after the sexual harassment accusations against Cain became public. So give us a little interpretation here, Brian.
Well, the Republican voters have been bouncing all over the place all election year. The one steady thing that you see in these polls from January 1st to this Sunday is that Mitt Romney remains in this 30% range in almost every poll. He doesn't go up or down very much, which there's a lot of ways to interpret that. But the way I interpret it is that with the rest of the field so divided, there are a bunch of folks that are, for now, are willing to line up with some of these other candidates. If the guy they like catches fire and he goes way ahead of Mitt Romney, they're in for the long haul. But I think some of those folks, as these other candidates start to fade away, will start, and we get down to a 1, 2, 3 person race. I think Romney's going to pick up a significant percentage of those votes in Florida.
This is not a sprint; it's a marathon. There's a lot of caucuses, a lot of primaries, and the winner doesn't take everything like in the electoral college in certain places. So if Romney can continue to have a 25% showing or something, if he can pull out some wins, accumulate his delegates, and let the other ones knock one another off or make gaffes, by definition of just holding constant, he could emerge as the nominee.
All right, we'll be back to wrap it up after this. And as always, we end with a Crowley closer.
Well, a couple of interesting things in the Quinnipiac poll last week that were both good news and bad news for Barack Obama. The bad news was that 83% of Florida voters, a must-win state, believe that the country is going in the wrong direction. They're either very dissatisfied or somewhat dissatisfied with the direction the country is going in. That number is not going to change significantly a year from now because the economy is not going to improve that much a year from now. The good news for Obama in the poll was that 51% of those polled said that they trust Barack Obama.
And that's an improvement.
It's an improvement, and it's good news because people tend to first vote for people they like and trust, and I think that will help Barack Obama. Side note to that, Mitt Romney also got about 51% in the trust value, so if he's the nominee, it could be a fascinating race in Florida next year.
It's always a fascinating time to talk to these gentlemen. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Robert. We'll see you next week.
Pleasure.
And thank you for joining us. Have a great Sunday.